Oh, you want me to record you? Sure.
Hi, I'm Chanel Roberts, and the title of my paper is The Delicate State of Miss Blanche Dubois in Tennessee Williams, A Streetcar Named Desire. I'll begin with a quote from Blanche Dubois discussing her history with Mitch, a potential lover, from scene 9 of Streetcar. Yes, a big spider. That's where I brought my victims. Yes, I had many intimacies with strangers. After the death of Alan, intimacies with strangers was all I seemed able to fill my empty heart with. I think it was just panic that drove me from one to another, hunting for some protection here and there in the most unlikely places, even at last in a 17-year-old boy. But somebody wrote the superintendent about it. This woman is morally unfit for her position. Truly? Yes, I suppose. Unfit somehow, anyway. So I came here. There was nowhere else I could go. I was played out. You know what played out is? My youth suddenly gone off the water spout, and I met you. You know what played out, you said you needed somebody. Well, I needed somebody too. I thanked God for you, because you seemed to be gentle, a cleft in the rock of the world that I could hide in. But I guess I was asking, hoping, too much. Kefauver, Stanley, and Shaw have tied an old tin can to the tail of a kite. Crumble and fade, regrets, recriminations. If you'd done this, it wouldn't have cost me that. Legacies, and other things, such as blood stain, pillow slips, permanently exchanging. Yes, Mother, but couldn't we get a colored girl to do it? No, we couldn't, of course. Everything gone but the death. I used to sit here, and she used to sit over there, and death was as close as you are. But we didn't dare even admit that we had heard of it. The opposite is desire. So do you wonder? How could you possibly wonder? Not far from Belle Reve, before we had lost Belle Reve, was a camp where they trained young soldiers. On Saturday nights, they would go in town to get drunk, and on the way back, they would stagger onto my lawn and call, "Blanche, Blanche!" The deaf old lady remaining suspected nothing. But sometimes I slipped outside to answer their calls. Later, the paddy wagon would gather them up like daisies, the long way home. So this excerpt holds a variety of elements of Blanche Dubois' character points, psychological and otherwise. We can hear Blanche's frantic nature as she attempts to justify these victims in all of her intimacies with strangers. Blanche addresses her trauma after the death of her husband, Alan, at a young age. Miss Blanche Dubois is often viewed as a trollop, a floozy, a gold digger on the hunt for her next victim after losing the family estate, Belle Reve. However, by acknowledging the symptoms and signs of post-traumatic stress disorder in Blanche, she becomes a victim of trauma. Throughout the play, we are taught to distrust Blanche as well as to empathize with Stella. Physical over psychological trauma reigns supreme yet again. Rather than focusing on the physicality of Stanley in relation to Stella, my focus will be on the treatment of Blanche. This traumatized woman is devalued, distrusted, unappreciated, undermined, as well as verbally and sexually assaulted. Blanche is used as a scapegoat and is really nothing more than a psychologically traumatized individual seeking solace and peace after a traumatic life. There are several signs and symptoms of PTSD. The National Institute of Mental Health assigns post-traumatic stress disorder the following signs and symptoms: flashbacks, bad dreams, frightening thoughts, avoiding feelings and thoughts surrounding trauma, avoiding locations surrounding trauma, being easily startled, feeling tense, difficulty sleeping, angry outbursts, difficulty remembering trauma, negative thought of self, distorted feelings such as guilt or blame, loss of interest in things one used to enjoy, self-destructive behavior, difficulty maintaining relationships, and memory problems. So I'm going to focus on 3 umbrella subjects for this argument. So we're going to start with aversion. Blanche effectively removes herself from all reminders of her loss of Alan. Through the misfortune of fate, all of the mentioned family members have died in recent years. According to her talk with Stella, she loses her job, and lastly, she leaves to move in with her sister and her husband, Stella and Stanley. Overall, Blanche's life has been completely changed and shifted away from what it once was with Alan. Upon reaching Stella's new home, Blanche is set up with another trial of aversion, Stanley. Stanley refuses to believe Blanche has not liquidated the family estate and kept Stella out of the games. From his first meeting with Blanche, Stanley remains on edge and suspicious throughout the play. When Stanley hears of the loss of Belle Reve, he immediately calls upon the Napoleonic Code, which state that which belongs to the wife belongs to the husband. Throughout Stanley's arguments and his assessments of Blanche's clothing, it is clear that he is selfishly asserting a claim on lost funds. One could argue Stanley would use this money for the baby he and Stella are expecting, or to fuel his gambling and drinking needs. Nonetheless, Stanley uses his ill will to deconstruct what Blanche has made her reality. This false suspicion creates a distrust that leads Stanley to the truth of Blanche's past and her previous sexual appetites. Stanley follows his friend's information and discovers Blanche and several visitors to an apartment in town. As a man, Stanley feels it is his duty to enlighten Mitch, to whom Blanche has expressed an interest. By working as hard as he did, Stanley has uncovered the truth beneath Blanche's new reality. This creation of a new reality is based on her aversion to her old one, to the loss of Alan. Blanche has previously shared details of Alan's suicide with Mitch privately when addressing her previous relations. In this conversation, we learn of a suspected affair between Alan and another man, and of Blanche's announcing her disgust with him moments prior to Alan's suicide. This is shared in a hope for Blanche to receive the comfort and solace she requires to heal from this traumatic event. When Blanche has finished relating her tale, Mitch says to her, "You need somebody, and I need somebody too. Can it be me and you, Blanche?" The two embrace, and all is well for a moment, until the interference of Stanley. This intimate moment could have helped with Blanche's symptoms. Though she is reliving a traumatic experience in her life, she's doing it with another person and seeking care and emotional support. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, the support of family and friends is crucial to healing past traumas and is the first step in building an active life once more. Stanley's meddling creates Mitch the monster who refuses the Blanche that has been uncovered and even goes as far as to attempt to rape her while alone in the apartment. This event strains Blanche's delicate reality further. When Stanley eventually has Blanche alone while Stella is delivering their baby, he finally completes his abuse of her and raping her while her sister is away. In this action, Blanche's aversion heightens to extremes and she creates her final identity and withdrawal from reality. In her adult mind, she is off to live with Mr. Shemp Huntley, a man she once knew that she is certain will accept her into his life on such short notice. Next, we delve into anger. So Blanche has several episodes of angry outcries. These episodes range in their intensity and have several recipients. The first is her interaction with her sister Stella. Blanche talks quickly and excessively, hardly letting Stella get a word in edgewise. Blanche also acknowledges here that she can't be alone because, as you may have noticed, I'm not very well. After this introduction to her illness, Blanche goes on to reproach Stella for having left their home with Belrive. Blanche is desperate for rest and peace. She tells Stella all the burden descended on my shoulders. She stayed for it, fought for it, bled for it, almost died for it. She took the blows on her body and her face, all those deaths, corpses burned like rubbish. You didn't dream, but I saw. Death is expensive, Miss Stella. Finally, she asks Stella, where were you? In bed with your Polak. The string of dialogue shows Blanche's anger at her sister for abandoning the family and family estate to the eldest sister. Blanche's accusation end with Stella in tears and the men coming in from bowling. The tone quickly changes back to Blanche's performative, entertaining Stanley while Stella washes her tear-stricken face in the bathroom. This scene highlights other elements of trauma behind Blanche's actions. Blanche and Stella's family estate is sold and parceled out due to many deaths in the family and the need to pay for medications, funerals, etc. Blanche had to stay home and endure the many deaths of the family, treating the sick in their last moments. She harbors lasting traumas and anger for having to maintain house for a dying family. These angry outbursts are quite possibly a reaction to the negative view of self Blanche adopts after the death of Alan. Blanche feels, as is shown in her recounting of Alan's death to Mitch, responsible for Alan's suicide. The last thing she said to him was an expression of disgust, and she has internalized that as the cause of his suicide. The repression of guilt and potentially anger at herself for causing Alan's death comes out as anger at external stimuli. Blanche also feeds this anger with alcoholism, a secret she keeps from her sister and the men around her. When she enters Stella's apartment, she finds a bottle in the cupboard and helps herself, only to take another sip when Stella arrives, and another when she puts the bottle away. She affirms to Stella, "Oh, I can only have one." Later, when she is talking with Mitch as the men plays poker, she blames the men for her having to consume 3 drinks that evening. Alcohol abuse is a potential result of PTSD, something a person would use to dull the memories and pains they feel from the remembrance of the event. Blanche seems to be using alcohol to repress her old pains and attempt to move forward into a brighter future. Next, move into sexual need. So Blanche seems to be seeking a certain type of man to fulfill her needs after the loss of Alan. After losing a young husband, Blanche seems to be fulfilling her desires through the use of young men. Blanche admits to a 17-year-old at school. She takes a kiss from a young man delivering the paper while awaiting Mitch. And in her final fantasy, she has died and is given medical attention from some nice-looking ship's doctor, a very young one. Blanche is living in a lost moment in time when she had Alan. Blanche is stuck in an unhealthy loop, unable to escape the trauma that chased her from Belrive. Throughout the play as well, Blanche admits to flirting with Stanley. This is a different type of relationship, though, in that Blanche does not seem interested in anything but compliments from Stanley. Stella urges Stanley to comment on her dress and her appearance, yet Stanley claims he don't go in for that stuff, when Blanche states clearly that she was fishing for a compliment. Blanche knows that her youth is fading, and as such, wants to be reminded of her beauty and what it was. However, Stanley's harsh nature is not one to follow scripted cues for compliments that are begged rather than earned. Stanley ends the play as the victor. Stanley has the baby and Stanley has the baby and family with Stella and has used and destroyed Blanche to get her out of the way. Blanche does not deserve this treatment. Blanche is a victim of a traumatic past full of very sudden deaths and much loss. It is not okay to have Mitch attempt to take what was owed to him from Blanche's body after learning she offered the same prize to other men before him. Blanche did not deserve the sudden loss of her young husband nor the guilt associated with it. Blanche did not deserve to be raped by her brother-in-law due to his knowledge of her old promiscuous ways. Stanley is flawed in his physical and sexual aggressions. Mitch, too, is flawed in his sexual aggression. Stella is flawed in her state of denial, rejecting Blanche's telling of rape and her refusal to leave Stanley after physical abuse. Yet, even though all of these characters are flawed and possibly ill, Blanche is a victim who is ignored as such. Stella, Stanley, and Mitch are treated in most cases with sympathy and compassion. We sympathize with Stella for being in an abusive relationship and acknowledge the difficulties in attempting to separate from an abuser. Eunice and the men let Stanley abuse Stella and do not interfere with his actions, other than to separate the two after Stanley has struck her. Mitch is treated with sympathy by Stanley when Stanley saves Mitch from a commitment to Blanche. Blanche is treated with scorn, patronized by Stella, raped by Stanley, and nearly raped by Mitch. Stella, Stanley, and Mitch treat Blanche as a second-class citizen in their environment. By devaluing Blanche and refusing her sympathy, she is further separated from the others. By blaming her failures on her promiscuity rather than associating her promiscuity with her trauma, Blanche is then viewed as worthless and her traumas and issues go unresolved. Mental illness can have the same or worse repercussions as physical abuses, yet Blanche goes through both, and we do not sympathize due to the focus on her sexual agency rather than on her illness.
So